Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of our WCN Fluencer podcast. I'm your host, Christopher McClellan, and I am so excited because I get to talk to somebody from Louisiana today. It's my second home state, and we're in Baton Rouge and Lake Worth, Florida. I think we're going to end up trying to get some beignets somewhere along the line with Consuela. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
We should be meeting like a Cafe du Monde in Jackson Square and just kind of kick back. What do you think?
Yes, that's the spot. That is the spot.
I love talking Louisiana. Now I'm going to want gumbo and shrimp Creole and
come on over.
Come on. What's your favorite
Yes.
dish?
Oh, I'm a gumbo girl.
You're a gumbo?
I love gumbo, so that works for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you also love working with caregivers.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I do. I love it.
Because caregivers can find a foothold with you.
Oh, look, that's what it's all about, is finding that way that fits for your life, for supporting the needs of someone you care about. Yeah.
And it's so great to have you a part of the Whole Care Network and talking about caregiving from your perspective and your story. But all of our listeners and viewers want to know about your story as an occupational therapist. How did you get into the caregiving side of this?
Well, in providing occupational therapy services, you have to interact with someone who's there to support the needs of the person that is going through an illness or the things that come with aging. And there's always a limit that you see in someone's life who's going through a difficulty. And so in caring for that, in the occupational therapy setting and caring for that person, I realized very early on that caregiver plays an important role in meeting the goals and meeting the ability of that person to work toward regaining their life. And so having that caregiver involved in that process is essential. So that is my heart, is making sure that caregiver is able to remain, because if the caregiver leaves the picture, then things don't often go well for those who have lasting deficits. So I love the caregiver and I love the heart that comes with it. But I also know those challenges that come with caregiving, because I've been that caregiver a great portion of my life. And so my desire is to really support them in supporting the needs of their loved one.
I always like to say that there's no strangers when it comes to caregiving.
No.
We may not know each other personally, but we do get to know each other. But through our stories, where story sharing, where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause, we know you when we don't know you personally. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about, talking to other caregivers, both here in the United States and across the globe, is we all share this passion and love and our stories that really tell people why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes, exactly. Caregiving touches all of our lives. It will look different and it comes at different junctures in our lives, but it is often the same story. It has the same undertones, the same challenges that a lot of us face, and really the same rewards of stepping into that role of being a caregiver. So yes.
Yeah, there's no greater honor than to assist somebody in their time of need.
Exactly. I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. So finding a foothold, when we were first introduced, I really love that, because caregivers, when they're in the midst of a care situation, that's usually some form of an emergency or an untimely diagnosis, and suddenly they're thrust into this role. And how do you find a foothold into it? Because not most people, most people aren't well versed in the medical field or the legal fields, and they're thrown right into it in the middle of an emergency.
Yes. Exactly. And when the name Finding a Foothold popped into my head, it actually was out running one day after I had had a fall and was just really being mindful of my footing. Like, okay, make sure you don't do the same thing again.
Right.
You didn't see it the first time, but now be more aware of where you're going. Don't get too distracted, and just the timing of that thought and something that I was listening to in my head, um, it collided. They were saying
Mhm.
the word foothold was actually spoken into my ear as I was listening to a book. And I thought it was just, I laughed. I said, the timing of that thought and what came into my head was great. And I was actually thinking about what do I call my new consulting and coaching service. And it just sort of come together. And I actually go back to that thought in my mind often, in that it's not that I'm no longer supposed to run. I'm not supposed to do the very thing that I think is a big part of my life. It's just that I do have to continue to be more wisely in
Right.
the steps that I take so that I don't get injured, that I don't get caught off guard. And it's just like, okay, continue, but have this more awareness of where you're going and what's around you and what's around you. And when you see those elevations on the road or those potholes in the road, that you have to plan for those and watch yourself, make pivots, So all of this was coming together, Chris. And I'm like, this is a perfect name that I
It,
can use because it's a perfect description of how caregiving is. Yeah,
exactly. And that was one of my thoughts. I said, finding a foothold. It's like, oh
yeah,
my gosh, I remember when I first got my first caregiving, I use this word kindly, my first caregiving gig. I just,
yeah.
with Richard, it's like, where do I, how do I find my
Yeah,
path in this?
yeah.
Then in 2011, there wasn't a whole lot on the internet, but you do got to find your foothold into this because you're not just dipping your toe in, you're dipping the whole, you're dipping the whole leg in.
Yes, and the ramifications of doing something that can be harmful affects your whole life.
Right.
That particular fall, I didn't end up in the ER, but there was a fall that I had that did result in me, like,
Yeah. Mm.
some injuries and had to go get checked out. But it definitely impacts your life when you are not prepared, and we're not prepared for many of the things that come with caregiving, but you learn from those
Right.
and you learn to navigate around those bumps in the road so that you can have success. It doesn't mean you give up, but it doesn't
Right.
mean you see the pothole ahead of you and then you go first, head first into it. No, you got to know how to navigate around those um, ebbs and flows that come with caregiving in order to, finish the race well. Yeah.
I think that, and one of the words that come to mind when I think about you and finding a foothold is that of an advocate.
Hmm. Hmm.
We all have these stories that we want to share, but that role of an advocate and to help people in their journey is very prevalent in the work that you do.
Oh, yes. Um, it's just finding that way that fits for you is what I advocate. It is that you take an inventory of what are the challenges, what are the needs of that loved one that
Mhm.
are presenting themselves. What are those needs that are presented? And what can you do in the best way that you can to meet that need for that person? And really trying to find that way to bring those two worlds together. The
Right.
world of where does their need begin? What is the end of what they can do for themselves safely? And what is the thing that you can bring into the picture, and I want to advocate for both ends. I want to make sure that that person knows what they can do for themselves,
Mm.
but then
Right.
also as the caregiver enters into the picture, really being an advocate for them as well, meaning it's not all about what your care recipient
Right.
needs in the way of you having to be the one that provides all of those needs. That my push is for that caregiver to recognize where their limits are. What
Right.
is it they can bring to help supplement that need that is there? And what are some things that they cannot do? What are some things that are going to be so damaging to their lives that they are leaving that whole situation with such a deficit in their own life that
Hmm.
it takes away from them? So I'm advocating that for
That's
the
so important.
caregiver to really take inventory of what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses, and being okay with saying, this is where I end in my emotional and physical abilities. And this is where the plan and the gaps and all of the things that need to be added into the picture that surround me and support me in order for whatever that deficit is that
Yeah.
is trying to be filled.
Yeah. And I think that you've identified one of the big changes, I think, in the medical profession over recent time here, where the caregiver is being recognized
Mhm.
by doctors, uh, physician assistants, nurses, occupational therapists always
Yes,
recognize
yes,
the caregiver.
yes.
So, but I think it's more we're so prevalent. Caregiving is so prevalent now, and it's looked at as as the conduit. If I've
Yes.
one I had a guest tell me a number of years ago, we're talking about this, and it always stuck with me. She was asking her doctor a lot of questions, and she said, well, I hope you don't mind me asking all these questions. And the doctor's response, and I always remember this, the best patients are the ones who ask the questions.
Yes.
And same thing with the best caregivers are the ones asking the questions,
That's right.
being there and being present and being recognized as a part of the care, as the CEO of the care team.
Oh, absolutely. And making it okay to ask and having
Yeah,
platforms or ways to make it safe to ask is
right.
really important, because a lot of a lot of the stress and the challenges that come with caregiving is caregivers don't know who to ask.
Right.
And outside of that one visit from the doctor, and the doctor is really, if you got one that's supportive, like you mentioned, getting those questions answered, but things are not stagnant. There's just so many moving parts to
There's a lot
caregiving
of
that
moving parts, right?
there are things that work for the now that won't work a week from now or 2 weeks from
Right.
now. And just really having uh, the ability to keep asking
Right.
as you are navigating the caregiving journey is a gap that has been really hard to feel for the caregiver in finding,
Very.
where do I go now? Where do I go now in order to keep things, to keep
Hmm.
that joining together of providing the services that are needed.
Right.
You've got to have that. Otherwise, you get stuck in a plan or a way that you were doing things that is no longer conducive for your health and is no longer conducive for your loved one's abilities, because you're not able to come up to par as those needs become
Yeah.
greater.
And I always refer to myself when I when I make some of these comments, because I had to learn, I learned the hard way that my caregiving cape is limited. I can't do
Yes,
I
exactly.
can't do everything, and but we want to do everything,
Hmm.
but we also have to be mindful of our own health and well-being, because we're our care partners, and I'm using that term generic.
Yes.
We're their lifeline, and if we're
Yeah.
not taking care of ourselves, there's usually not a plan B in place.
Yes, and I'm all about that advocate for having that plan A and B and C and D, and really evolving your role as things change in the life of your life and in the life of the one you're caring for.
Mhm.
Things cannot
They,
be the same, cannot
they
expect it
don't.
not to change, and you've
Yeah, they
got to
don't change.
be willing to pivot. And
Exactly.
one thing that I find is a big challenge for caregivers is seeing that things are not working, but yet not having that boldness to, or no, not having, um, not seeing that things can't stay the same. Let me see if
Right.
I can word it a little bit.
Yeah.
You always want things to, like,
Yeah.
from the care recipient side, they have
Yeah.
their life that they've lived for
Right.
50,
Hmm.
60, 70 years that looked like a plan A. Their plan A was
Right.
their life.
Mm.
But there has to be a time when the norm of that person you're caring for is different. And
Right.
caregivers don't often see that. They're still trying to keep that mode, that life, that that life cycle the same for their loved one, but they're just forever changes in their life, and it's like more leaky holes in the bucket. And then the
Exactly.
caregiver comes and they plug that in, and then something else leaks on the other end, so then they have to drop something else and come around, and now they got to come back on tomorrow because now mom is accustomed to having all of her laundry done on Tuesdays, and then mom
Right.
makes an appointment on Wednesday, and then then you all of a sudden they have no life because their whole mission has now shifted, not from
Just
just
shifted.
providing for the needs, but trying to create this bubble that existed for 50, 60, 70 years, and trying
Right.
to keep it running clockwise in a fashion so that their loved one is not made uncomfortable. And
Right.
I think that is a big mistake if you're
Well,
thinking
you're right on. You're
that
spot on target.
you don't want them to be uncomfortable. You still want mom and dad to
Uh,
have their whole week look the same, but yet
it's
your week and your life is
yeah.
totally in chaos.
It's in total chaos, and we have this mindset that things are going to get better.
Yes. Yes.
And the truth of the matter is things plateau, and
Yes.
then they get a little worse, and then
Yes.
they get it'll stay.
Yes.
It could stay. We want everybody to get better, but
Yes.
the stark reality of it is there's always a plateau, and there might be a bump up just a little bit, but it's always a level, because there's two very common aspects to caregiving that we're never prepared for: a beginning and an end.
Yes. Exactly.
And
And
that's kind of the stark reality of
mhm.
the beautiful, getting a little emotional, the beautiful roles that we play. As difficult as they are, it really is an honor to be a caregiver.
It really is. And there's no greater feeling when you can step in and really provide for that need of that person and allow them to sort of settle into life that's comfortable
Hmm.
for them, and really feeling like you're doing a good thing. That
Hmm.
really feels good, and we all want that.
Yeah.
But there's that opposite side of that is if you take it to the extreme and not really having that same lens on when you're really looking at your life and saying
Right.
your life requires that same amount of attention. Uh,
Yeah.
Even looking at the compromises that are going to be made, and we all know life won't be the same, but
Right.
in finding your foothold means what are going to be
Oh,
those things that you say in your life, I can't compromise on these. I
yeah.
really need to keep these things intact, and I can compromise on other things, but I
I
am
can't.
gonna make allowances for their needs to be added around
Right.
what is already in place for my life that I can't afford to lose at this
Right.
current time. So
Yeah. Because the easier said than done, self-care. I've kind of changed because I know caregivers are real tired of hearing the word self-care. So I said, well, what about self-compassion?
Mhm.
It's okay to say no when it's appropriate.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, self-care is not one of the terms that I like to use
Yeah.
often as well, because I like to really think about it, if make things so efficient in the way of how you're going to craft your day through setting limits on what you can do, till I wouldn't have to tell you to take care of
Hmm.
yourself,
Right.
because you're going to set in place by looking at the need, what is the support you can give, what are the other things that can be brought into the picture, and forever navigating that and having difficult conversations, and even going into areas where other people are not really in support of you being
Right.
looking at your life, but having to say, no, I'm just still going to have to do this. And if you just really concentrate on doing the things that fit for your life
Right.
around the compromising, because that's always going to be there, I won't
Right.
have to tell you to do self-care, because self-care
Right. Because it'll
automatically gets
yeah.
factored into the equation. I
Yeah.
think when people preach self-care, it can make
It
someone feel like, I
it
can't do
it has
another thing. You telling
it's
me
a
now it's a
it's
negative
actually a
connotation?
negative. Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
just want to show you how you can continue to do what your heart says to do in a manner
Hmm.
that allows for the self-care to already be
It just
in
it's a
place, and
it's a
you
part of the routine.
it is a part of the routine, and it's already put in place first. That
Right.
and
Mm.
But you don't know this in the beginning as a caregiver. You're jumping in
Right.
there, all
Well,
hands on deck. Yes.
you're putting that foothold right in the pot. It's
Yeah, and that's how caregiving, when you say the start of caregiving, that's how it starts for many of
well,
us. We're just
I
jumping in.
I'll ask you this is I've been asking this question for years. And so Consuela, have you met anybody that has caregiving on their bucket list of things to do in life?
Not at all.
Not at all.
No.
Now I've had some people I've learned, and it's been great. Some people have chosen to be caregivers.
Yes.
They've their spouse or their partner
Oh, yeah.
has a precondition, and my heart goes out to those folks that
You
know go.
know, but I can say I actually knew early on I would be my mom's caregiver,
Yeah.
just because of what I do for a living and what the lifestyles and the comfort levels of my sisters are, and their
Hmm.
strengths and weaknesses. I actually knew I would be the one.
You had
And
that.
so I was always never wanting it to happen, but I'm like, okay, if
Yeah.
mom, it was always in the back of my
You just
mind that
knew.
I would
Yeah.
be her caregiver. So I
Yeah.
did have things in place, had a lot of things that I thought my mom would just willingly come and it'd be happily ever after. But that didn't quite work out the way I planned, because she came kicking and screaming and didn't want to be here.
They didn't want to be. Yeah.
So it was a
Yeah.
lot of different things that I had to deal with on that side of the
Yeah.
caregiving, where I
Yeah.
was physically prepared to care for my mom, but I wasn't
Yeah.
emotionally prepared
That's a whole other.
for
I
those
mean, we could do a
challenges.
whole show on the
Ooh, so
emotionally.
that part
Yeah, and
is,
I think we
yes.
probably will do a whole other show on the emotional component. But we've talked a lot about caregiving in and of itself. But let's
Yes.
talk about Consuela. What does
Okay.
Consuela like to do when she's not helping caregivers?
Oh, wow. I always say I have a boring, mundane life. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of excitement for me, but I am an avid runner, so I do like
I think you just did a 5K with
the
with the
New
New
Orleans.
Orleans Saints.
Yeah,
That I under yeah.
and I did pretty good on that. So I run several days a week, and so running is a big part of my life. But I also have other outside things I like. I am married, and so I have a great support person in my
Uh-huh.
life. That's definitely
So important.
so important in me doing what I'm doing today,
Yeah.
and also having, still working a little bit as a part-time occupational therapist doing home health. But this
Hmm.
was in my off time. I mean, the running and getting to do some gardening. And I also participate in a mentorship group where I get to spend time with some high school students, and trying to encourage them and being a mentor with them and helping with tutoring. Yeah,
And you have a podcast too.
yes. And yeah, I have a podcast. So out, going back into the world of finding a foothold, yes, there is a podcast, Caregivers Finding a Foothold, and it allows caregivers to just pose that question that is a challenge for the everyday doing of
Right.
caregiving. Like,
Yeah.
you're having issues with a transfer, having issues with anything related to the doing of caregiving. And you call the podcast, you fill out a form, and I present the, the question on my podcast, and I give you lots of options to choose
Lots of
from
options, right?
that can help make bathing a little bit easier, or making a car transfer easier, or just even navigating those emotional times.
Those tasks that most of us don't know how to do, that we're thrust into it. So,
Yes, and
yeah.
helping you to streamline those tasks so that you have opportunities for yourself. It's amazing when I see patients locally who would say, "Oh, it takes me 3 hours to get mom up, cleaned up, getting her breakfast, and by that time it's lunch." I'm like, "What are you doing? Takes you 3 hours?" I'm like, "Okay, let's see if we can get that down to an
I think we
hour
can help you
or
out.
less." And let's
Yeah.
talk about some things that are no longer practical. Let's talk
Right.
about what is a new way of doing things that, number one, decrease your injury risk, because some things
Exactly.
that put
Very important.
you at risk for injury, risk for you injuring the one you're caring for, and it just takes too much time. It's just no longer really the big picture in how the morning routine needs to look. And so it really just, that's a big eye opener for people when they call in, or I'm working with them one-on-one or in one of my group sessions, and I'm talking about letting go of routines
Yeah.
and reestablishing what the new needs to be in order for you to save time and energy, so that you want to do something else other than caregiving, because the way you're going, you don't have
Where you're
time,
going,
and you don't have energy. So
and it's so good for the caregiver to have an objective third person that can look at a situation like yourself
mhm.
and be able to talk uh, honestly, but from
Yes.
experience
Hmm.
that is helping that caregiver who is not sure where to turn next, and
Oh
but they can
yes.
talk to a like-minded person and
Look, and no,
and feel supported.
and know that I've had all the same feelings, and I've made many of the same mistakes,
Yeah.
and is really an eye opener when I ask a caregiver, um, "Is this about control?"
No.
I mean,
Yes.
because sometimes as caregivers, we want to be in
Yeah, control
control.
it. I'm the only one that can do this. Nobody else can do this.
Yes, yes.
I'm the best caregiver.
Is it your way or no way? Or
That's right.
yes,
And it's
mhm,
about giving up. Uh,
yes, yes,
there's so much to that because
ye-
you can't do it all by yourself. Just as you
yes.
can't age solo, you
Ah,
can't be a caregiver by yourself. So, Consuela, you're like, I just want to come to Louisiana and spend some time with you.
well,
Goodness.
look, please do.
We'll
Like I
we'll
said,
do Cafe Du Monde in the morning. We'll drive to New
yes.
Orleans, and
Hmm.
then we'll come back and we'll do some gumbo at your house, and we'll just
Oh
kind
my,
of.
well, I didn't say I cook it. I said I eat
Oh,
it.
my mom taught me well. I know how she never wrote the recipe down, but I know what she did to make
Well, how about
the.
you come and you cook the
I would do that.
gumbo,
I will do.
and
I'd be happy to do that.
yes.
So
Well, no, I do cook it, but I would prefer not to. So,
yeah. So
yeah.
Consuela, it's so great to have you a part of the Whole Care Network,
Oh, I'm
and you're
excited to
doing
be
such
here.
wonderful work. And so let all of our listeners and viewers know how they can be in touch with you.
Well, great. And I want to say I'm so honored to be a part of the Whole Care Network, in how they have just they make it easy. They make it easy for me to want to continue to do what I'm doing because they provide the support, and it puts me in the company of care, other professional caregivers who are like-minded like I am. And so it's just an honor to be a part of
Oh,
Whole
thank
Care
you.
Network. So thank you.
Yeah, we're growing because of awesome people like yourself who are
Oh,
sharing their talents and skills for the betterment
great.
of everybody in care. But yeah, we let it, we'll have all your contact information in the show notes.
Yes.
But let everybody know we want to hear it from the source. We want to hear it
Okay,
from the
well,
source.
look,
Yeah,
we've talked about the podcast. I have the
right.
Caregivers Find It a Foothold podcast, and there's a blog, and those are on my website. And the two things that I am very passionate about, and that I feel so proud of being able to assist people in, is in the group coaching program. I have
Yes.
two of them, and the one that is specifically for caregivers is called Unlosing You in Caregiving. And it is a
I
group
love that.
coaching program
Uh-huh.
where it's just a monthly subscription based program. You can sign up
Hmm.
1 month, don't come back the next month, sign back up again.
You can.
Just different topics that I cover. I have a set of topics that I talk about each month.
Hmm.
And then I add topics based on the feedback from a questionnaire. So I try
Hmm.
to make those groups very personal. They're small in number, and they're not recorded because I want you to feel like you can talk
Feel like,
about what
yeah.
you want to talk about, what your challenges are. So it typically
Hmm.
starts with me having something that I had prepared, and then the
Hmm.
last end of that meeting is just what has sparked in your mind related to the topic, and really answering those questions on the spot of like, these are some things that you can consider. And I'm
Right.
taking note and like, okay, I'm going to send you all some
Hmm.
PDFs on these different things or some links, and really trying to support them in the current situation that they're in. So that is Unlosing You in Caregiving, and we meet twice a month.
Wow.
And for the low price of $49 a month. And the it's really been fun, and I feel like I
Yeah.
have made some friends in that group, and allowing them to be open and honest about their issues in caregiving.
Yeah.
um and my second one, and this is actually a new one, Chris, and it's actually, I'm going to sort of launch it in November, and it's going to be really targeted to those aging adults. Because I am I'm a certified aging in place
You're sort of,
specialist, and I am also a certified fall prevention specialist, in addition to being an OT.
yeah.
And I really want to talk to those aging adults who have concerns about being at home alone, who may be getting pressure to maybe move outside of their home because their
Hmm.
family members may be identifying some things that put them at risk for injury. So it's a whole aging in place group coaching, and it is called Staying Safe in Your Place.
I like that.
Staying
Yeah.
Safe in Your Place, where I go through uh, a whole safety list of things to consider in setting up your bedroom, your bathroom, the
Hmm.
kitchen, and really talking about different diagnoses and what are some things that typically come down the line in certain
Yeah.
disabilities or diagnosis, and how to plan for those things and how to make some modifications in the
Having a
home
plan is
so
half
that
the
they
battle.
can remain in their home. And you look,
Yeah.
and actually it's just really making those changes to keep them safer and making them more independent, because if we can keep things on a better, even level in their life where they're making some accommodations in their home, it will prevent that premature need of having to have a caregiver come on board,
Hmm.
because we're going
Yeah.
to maybe reduce some of the
Review
falls
some.
that are
Sure.
happening, or set
Yeah.
up the environment where they are more independent instead of daughter having to come over
There you
and
go.
do X, Y, and Z. And
Sure.
so it's a win-win situation for that aging adult and as well as the caregiver. So that is another group coaching program that I'm launching in November.
You're just a busy person, which is all good.
I love it.
And you,
So
yeah, and
that's
we'll
what
have
I
all this
do.
information in the show notes, as well as
Yes.
on your landing page on the Whole Care Network. And
Yes.
I think you also have a course on WCN
I
University as
did.
well.
There
Yeah,
is a course called
there,
hospital to home. Get your
hospital to
ducks in a
home. Yeah,
row. Get your ducks in a row. So
yeah,
hospital to home. Get your ducks in a row is a webinar that's available. That sort of go through that whole process
right.
of what to expect during a hospital stay, and what are the things that you need to have in consideration as they are moving toward discharging back home, and getting you to think, is home the first stop for
Yeah,
them
yeah.
in their hospital discharge.
All exciting. So Consuela, with the
Yes.
great work that you are doing, you are certainly a WC influencer. And
Oh,
it is so great to have you a part of the network, but it's also even better to have you as a friend. Thanks
I
for joining me today.
appreciate that. Thank you so much, Chris.